Ever been told there was no seat for you at the table literally? I walked into the most exclusive restaurant in town thinking I was joining my in-laws for dinner, only to find every chair taken and a smile on my mother-in-law's face that said, "I planned this." But what she didn't know was that this was the worst place to try to humiliate me. Want to hear how I turned her perfect plan on its head without even raising my voice? Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. I'll never forget how the whole dining room seemed to hold its breath when I realized there wasn't a seat for me. I stood there like I'd wandered in by mistake, my fingers digging into the strap of my clutch so hard it left a mark. The place was all polished silver and hushed conversations, the kind of spot where people talk to deals over $200 steaks. And there I was, the uninvited guest at my own in-laws' party. Catherine's eyes sparkled with triumph, her lips curling into the kind of smile that says, "Checkmate," without a word. It was supposed to be a celebration 35 years of marriage from my husband's parents, a fancy dinner at Monarch with the whole family. I'd spent hours getting ready, wanting to show respect, to belong in their world of white linen and crystal glasses. But as soon as I arrived, I could feel the chill. 10 chairs around the table, 10 filled seats, not one for me. Catherine's voice rang out, sweet as poison. "Oh, Amanda, I didn't realize you were still coming without Mark." It was like being called out in front of the class as a kid, but worse because everyone was in on it. Her friends, Mark's sister, even his dad, they all shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to notice what was happening. My cheeks burned, but I held my head up, refusing to show the cracks. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, feel the way my pulse pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape. But I wasn't going to run. In that moment, the humiliation was sharp enough to taste metallic on my tongue, but beneath it, something colder settled in. I knew exactly what this was. Catherine had waited for this moment. She wanted the show, wanted to prove that no matter how hard I'd worked, no matter how I dressed, I'd never be one of them. And standing there under those judgmental lights, I made a silent promise to myself I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. If you've ever been in a moment like that where someone tried to put you in your place in front of everyone, stick around. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about refusing to shrink for anyone. Because no matter who tries to make you feel small, you deserve a seat at the table. My heart was pounding so hard I thought people might actually hear it thumping across the room. The anger was there, a wildfire just waiting for a spark, but I forced myself to hold it in. I pressed my lips together until they went numb, fighting off the tears that wanted to come. I wasn't going to cry in front of her. Not tonight. Not ever. It's funny how humiliation doesn't just hurt, it burns all the way through. I felt my face flush hot, my stomach twist in knots so tight it hurt to stand upright. I could see Mark's dad looking anywhere but at me, shifting in his chair like the floor was suddenly made of nails. Catherine didn't even bother pretending. She just watched, serene, like she was finally seeing me where she thought I belonged. Standing, excluded, and there was this voice in my head that whispered maybe she was right. Maybe I didn't belong there in their world of country clubs and pedigree and expensive fake smiles. For a second, I felt like I was back in high school with the rich kids who laughed at my thrift store sneakers. It's wild how fast you can regress when someone finds exactly the right wound to press. But under that sting was something else, a memory of every single time I'd pulled myself back up, of my dad with grease-stained hands, saying they can't take your worth from you, of my mom putting on her scrubs for a double shift with her chin held high, of all the moments I wanted to quit but didn't. I felt my fists clench at my sides. Let them stare. I wasn't leaving. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice in my head, like you do before a big presentation. I forced myself to really see the room, the clinking glasses, the hush of judgment, the polished silver that suddenly seemed cheap in its coldness. I reminded myself I'd worked too hard to be small now, and right then, I decided if they wanted a show, I'd give them one they'd never forget. See? Catherine didn't know the whole story. My name is Amanda Lewis. I'm 30 years old, and I built my career with nothing but grit, late nights, and an unhealthy amount of coffee. I'm a restaurant consultant who specializes in turning around places on the brink, not with fancy buzzwords, but with sweat, strategy, and genuine connection. I didn't grow up with catered birthdays or ski trips to Vail. My dad ran his own mechanic shop, independent, with oil under his nails. My mom was a nurse who taught me how to do homework at the hospital cafeteria while she snuck bites of cold dinner. I paid my own way through college, fought for scholarships, and when that wasn't enough, I worked 2 jobs. After school, I didn't wait for doors to open for me. I kicked them open. I learned every aspect of the business, from scrubbing ovens to balancing books to managing stubborn chefs with bigger egos than skill. By Vinci Secchi, I was leading multi-state projects, fixing failing kitchens, saving family businesses that meant everything to the people who ran them. Monarch wasn't just a pretty restaurant to me. It was a project I'd rescued 6 months ago, back when its new owner was crying in his office about bankruptcy. I'd helped redesign the entire service, even lighting. I didn't just save them, I made them better. But Catherine didn't know that, or worse, she wouldn't have cared. Standing there that night, purse digging into my palm, I remembered exactly who I was. I wasn't just Mark's wife, or the poor girl they tolerated out of politeness. I was Amanda Lewis, the woman who turned this overpriced palace into a success. And if they thought they could humiliate me in my own arena, they were about to learn otherwise. Sometimes I think about where I started compared to this glittering room. I was the kid who made sure the power bill was paid while my parents picked up extra shifts. I didn't learn table manners at Fancy Galiza. Learned them by watching YouTube before my first professional dinner. I used to count change for bus fare. Now I swipe a corporate card to fly across the country fixing broken restaurants. That's the thing people like Catherine don't get. Success doesn't erase where you come from, it makes you own it. It's the reason I'm damn good at what I do, because I remember what it's like to choose between groceries and rent. I understand the dreams of the owners I help. It's not theory to me, it's survival. But Catherine didn't care about any of that. To her, my background was a stain that no amount of success could bleach out. That's why she planned this dinner so carefully, reserving exactly 10 seats. She wanted to prove publicly that I'd never really belong, that all the education and money in the world couldn't buy me a place at her table. As I stood there, though, I felt strangely calm, because I finally saw it for what it was. Fear. Fear that someone like me, someone she couldn't control or impress, was part of her world now. That I was family, whether she liked it or not, and no matter what she did, she couldn't erase that. I let that realization settle in my bones like armor. I wasn't just surviving this moment, I was seeing it clearly. This wasn't about me being unworthy. It was about her being terrified of change. And I decided right then I wouldn't shrink to make her comfortable. I drew in a slow breath, steadying myself like before a big meeting with skeptical investors, because that's what this was, in a way a pitch for my dignity. I refused to let my voice shake. I refused to let my hands tremble. Catherine might have tried to set the scene for my defeat, but I was writing my own lines now. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to flip the table, to make sure she felt even half the shame she'd tried to serve me. But I'd learned long ago that real power isn't loud. It's quiet, controlled. It's in knowing who you are so completely that no one can make you question it. And I knew who I was. I was the consultant people called when they were desperate. The woman who'd walked into Monarch when it was failing and helped it become the hottest reservation in town. I was someone who deserved to be there, not because of who I married, but because of what I'd built. I think that's what scared Catherine most, that I hadn't needed her approval to get here, that I wouldn't beg for it now. So instead of shrinking, I lifted my chin and let a slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. It probably infuriated her even more than if I'd yelled, because in that moment, I decided I wasn't playing her game. I wasn't going to be the poor girl grateful for scraps. I was going to be exactly who I was, unapologetically, and she was going to have to watch. I know I'm not the only one who's been in a moment like that where someone tries to put you in your place, counting on you to crumble. Maybe you've felt that heat in your cheeks, that ache in your chest as you swallow your pride. If you've ever been there, you're not alone. And let me tell you, there's power in refusing to bow your head. That night at Monarch changed more than just how Catherine saw me. It changed how I saw myself, and how everyone around us did too. Sometimes the tables turn in ways you don't see coming in. Let's just say, Catherine wasn't ready for what happened next. If you're into stories about standing your ground, finding your voice, and refusing to be small, I'd love for you to stick around. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this journey. Because, trust me, it only gets better from here. There's something almost satisfying about refusing to play by someone else's script, about flipping the story in a way that leaves them speechless. And that's exactly what I was about to do. So, stay with me. Because if you think this dinner was over, you're in for one hell of a surprise. I still remember the first time Mark really surprised me. We were paired up for a marketing class project, and I assumed he'd blow it off, too busy with his shiny car and off-campus apartment. But he showed up early to every meeting, coffee in hand, asking if I was okay after my night shifts. He saw me when it felt like no one else did. We'd study until the library lights flickered off, talking about everything but the assignment. I told him about helping my dad at the shop, learning to troubleshoot things no one else could fix. He shared how he was tired of living in his family's shadow, wanting to build something real. It felt like we were both looking for an escape hatch from the lives people expected of us. What drew me in wasn't the money or the future his parents imagined for a mite, was the way he made space for me. He never made me feel embarrassed about working 2 jobs, about my thrift store clothes, or my big, messy dreams. If anything, he said they were the best things about me. Falling in love with Mark wasn't a whirlwind. It was a slow, steady build, like laying bricks one by one until you realized you had a home. I think that's why I trusted it so completely. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. When he proposed, it was quiet. Just the 2 of us on the balcony of our first apartment. He didn't promise me luxury. He promised partnership. And I believed him. Even on the nights when everything else feels like it's falling apart. Meeting his family for the first time felt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't rehearsed for. Their house was breathtaking, all polished floors and quiet wealth, art hanging on walls like they were galleries. I'd saved up 4 weeks to buy a decent dress, but when I walked in, Catherine's eyes flicked over it like it was laughable. She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was clinical. Her questions started immediately. Where did you grow up? What did your father do? How did you pay for school? She didn't want to know me. She wanted to sort me, classify me, figure out exactly how far beneath them I was. I remember the way my voice trembled only once when I said my dad was a mechanic. Not because I was ashamed, but because I felt her judgment like a slap across the table. She didn't say anything outright cruel. She didn't have to. Every polite question was a scalpel. Mark, oblivious in that infuriatingly gentle way, just grinned and filled the silence with jokes. He didn't hear the undertones, didn't see the way I was sinking further into my chair. It was my first lesson in how class warfare can look like perfect manners and silver platters. On the drive home, I tried to explain. He squeezed my hand and said, "She's just a little old-fashioned." I bit back the urge to ask if old-fashioned meant cruel. I let it go, thinking I could handle it, that it was just one dinner. I didn't realize then it was just the beginning. If that first dinner had been the only time, maybe I could have brushed it off. But it became a pattern. Invitations that got lost in the mail. Events where there mysteriously wasn't room for me. Comments about how refreshing it was that I didn't care about appearances usually right after I'd spent an hour trying to look nice. She had this way of praising me that felt like an insult. Amanda's so practical. She's not into status. Like she was explaining a stray dog she'd reluctantly let into the yard. Meanwhile, she bragged about luxury trips, her charity committees, the people she knew. Always just loud enough for me to hear. Mark didn't see it most of the time. He'd change the subject or tell me later that she didn't mean anything by it. It was the only thing we fought about, and the fights hurt more than I ever admitted, because deep down, I worried he was right. That maybe I was too sensitive. But I'd been in enough rooms where I wasn't wanted to know the difference. Catherine didn't hate me. She just didn't respect me. And to her, that was worse. She didn't think I was worthy of her son, her table, her world. It wasn't one big blow up. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And the worst part, I kept telling myself I could take it, that I was tough enough to swallow the insults, that as long as Mark loved me, it didn't matter. Until that dinner at Mana, when she made sure it did. Through all of it, Mark stayed the same. Kind, steady, When I was exhausted from work and school, he'd show up with takeout and let me vent about terrible customers or exams I thought I'd failed. He'd hold my hand on park benches while I cried about feeling like an imposter in his world. He always told me I was stronger than I knew. We built our relationship on a foundation Catherine couldn't see. Shared dreams about helping small businesses thrive, nights spent laughing over burnt homemade pizza, plans for a life where we didn't have to rely on anyone's approval. Even when I felt out of place with his family, I never felt that way with him. Still, her disapproval hung over us like storm clouds. I'd see it in the way she pursed her lips when he mentioned me, the polite silences at family dinners when I tried to talk about my work, the way she changed the subject whenever I offered an opinion that wasn't hers. It grated at me, but Mark would just squeeze my knee under the table, silently telling me to let it go. He was trying to keep the peace. I understood that. He loved his family, flaws and all, and he genuinely thought if I just gave her time, she'd come around. Part of me wanted to believe that too. I didn't want to make him choose. I didn't want to be the reason there was tension at Thanksgiving or awkward silences at birthdays. So I tried. God, did I try? I bit my tongue more times than I can count. I smiled through insults wrapped in compliments. I told myself it was temporary, that once she saw I wasn't going anywhere, she'd stop. I didn't know then that she'd never stop pushing unless someone pushed back. It wasn't always overt. That was the thing about Catherine. She was too polished for outright cruelty. Instead, it was the offhand comments at brunch about how different our upbringings were. The way she'd forget to tell me about plans until the last minute. The forced smile when I showed up anyway. She loved to talk about Mark 6, the lawyer's daughter, the socialite who summered in Martha's Vineyard. She'd drop their names like pearls she meant for me to admire. Meanwhile, she'd tell me it was so admirable that I didn't care about those things, as if being broke was a charming personality trait. It was exhausting, like being tested constantly and failing every time because the test was rigged. She'd ask about my consulting work with this expression of polite confusion. Oh, so you tell restaurants how to serve food better. I wanted to scream sometimes, but I didn't. Mark would tell me to ignore it, that she didn't mean it, that she didn't know how she sounded. I'd nod, because what else could I do? Fighting with him about his mother felt worse than swallowing the insult. I started keeping score in my head, but I never told him how long the list got. Looking back, I think that was the real wedge she drove between us. Not that he chose her over me, but that he didn't see it at all. He alive me. But he didn't understand that love alone wasn't enough to make her respect me, that it would take more than silence to change anything. Some nights, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I'd wonder if she was right, if I really didn't belong there. I'd replay every dinner, every party, every stilted conversation. I'd think about my dad's oil-stained hands, my mom's fraying scrubs, and wonder if they'd be embarrassed for me, for trying so hard to be part of a world that didn't want me. It's a dangerous thing, questioning your own worth because someone else can't see it. I started second-guessing my clothes, my words, even my laugh. Was it too loud, too crass, too working? It felt like I was editing myself for an audience that wouldn't clap no matter what I performed. There were days I considered not going to family events at all, just letting Mark go alone so I didn't have to plaster on the polite smile and pretend I was welcome. But then I'd see the look on his face when he talked about all of us being together, and I couldn't do it. I didn't want to be the reason he felt torn, so I kept showing up, kept trying, kept hoping she'd see the real me. The woman who worked her way into boardrooms where she didn't look like anyone else. The consultant chefs called after they'd tried everything else. The partner who didn't want Mark's money, just his heart. But deep down, I knew. I knew Catherine would never see me as enough. Not unless something forced her to, and that realization sat heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. When Mark told me his parents were planning a big 35th anniversary dinner, I didn't flinch. I actually felt relieved. Finally, a public event where Catherine couldn't pull her usual tricks. A reservation at Monarch meant no forgotten invites, no last-minute changes, or so I thought. We'd gotten a call from his dad himself, asking us to be there. Harold was always polite with me, even kind in his quiet way. I remember feeling hopeful. Maybe this was their olive branch. Maybe this dinner would be the night Catherine finally accepted that I was here to stay. I started planning what to wear a week in advance. Monarch wasn't just another restaurant. It was a restaurant. 6-month waitlist. Tables you had to know, someone to get. I wanted to look polished, professional, to show them I respected the occasion. Mark was excited too. He booked time off, made sure his schedule was clear. He wanted to celebrate his parents properly, and I wanted to be there for him, no matter how complicated it was with his mom. Because even with everything, this was his family. We both imagined the night going so differently. Toasts, laughter, maybe even a real conversation with Catherine. I think part of me believed that if I tried hard enough, dressed nicely enough, smiled politely enough, could finally work. I spent hours on my hair, perfecting the updo I'd learned from YouTube tutorials after too many failed attempts. My dress was a deep emerald green, tailored to fit just right, something I'd splurged on for big work events. Makeup subtle but flawless, meant to say I belong here. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. I rehearsed small thoughts in my head while curling my hair. Topics Catherine might actually engage with. New restaurant trends. Travel stories that didn't sound too down. I wanted so badly for there to be no ammunition for her tonight. As I zipped up my dress, I actually felt proud. Not just of how I looked, but of how far I'd come. From bussing tables in high school to consulting for places like Monarch. I reminded myself I'd earned my place at that table, that no one could take that from me. Mark complimented me before I left. He couldn't go last minute. Some deal in Chicago needed his attention. He was apologetic, but insisted I should go. They want you there. Don't let my mom push you away. Your family. I believed him, or I tried to. Driving there, I told myself it was just one night, one dinner. I even imagined Catherine complimenting me for once. Laughing with Harold, feeling like I'd finally crossed some invisible line into real acceptance. That naive little hope still makes me wince when I think about it now. The plan was always to go together. He even teased me for overthinking my outfit. But 2 days before the dinner, he got the call. His biggest client, a major deal, about to implode if he didn't fly out immediately. He paced our living room, sweczkazi open, trying to reassure me. It'll be fine. They want you there. My dad especially, he's looking forward to seeing you. He said it like it was obvious, like Catherine wouldn't dare pull anything with him gone. I wanted to believe that too. I really did. I watched him pack in a hurry, folding suits and typing emails simultaneously. He kissed me on the forehead, told me he'd make it up to me, that we'd have our own dinner when he got back. He genuinely thought I'd be okay, and I let him think that. I didn't want to be the insecure wife who couldn't handle one night alone with his family. I told him not to worry. I smiled while I said it, even though my stomach felt like it was full of stones. Because the truth was, I was worried, just not enough to say no. So when he hugged me goodbye at the airport, I promised I'd be fine. He believed me, I even believed myself a little. But as I turned onto the street where Monarch's grand entrance glittered in the twilight, my hands were shaking on the wheel. This wasn't the first time Catherine had tried to cut me out of the picture. There were birthdays where my invite got lost. Showers where she insisted it was just for close family, even as distant cousins filled the room. Every time, she had an excuse so smooth, it was almost believable. But, I knew she'd make these little comments in front of people that sounded harmless if you didn't know the subtext. Amanda doesn't care for these kinds of things. She's more comfortable somewhere casual. Always with that smile, like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. The art of exclusion by implication. I remember one Christmas when she organized a family photo. I stood to the side while she waved me away, saying there wasn't room in the frame. Mark thought I was overreacting when I cried about it later. She didn't mean it like that. But that was the problem. She always meant it like that. And she was so good at making me look crazy if I protested. I'd learned to bite my tongue. To sit with the humiliation like it was a polite dinner guest. I told myself over and over I was being mature, that it was better not to rock the boat. But every year, it got a little harder to swallow. By the time the anniversary dinner came around, I wasn't new to her games. I just thought Monarch was too public for her to try anything. I thought maybe for one night, she'd let me feel like family. Turns out, That was exactly the stage she wanted for the grand performance. I remember pulling up to Monarch, taking a deep breath before stepping out. The valet smiled, called me ma'am, made me feel important for 5 seconds. I adjusted my dress, told myself to act like I belonged. The lobby was glowing with soft light, the kind that makes everything feel like a dream. The host greeted me by name when I mentioned the reservation. "Right this way," he said, and I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe it would all be fine. But as we approached the table, I slowed. Something was wrong. There were 10 chairs. 10 people. No empty space. Harold was the first to see me. He stood up, surprise and then confusion on his face. Catherine stayed seated, sipping her wine like this was exactly as she'd planned. The table fell silent, all conversation drying up. Everyone turned to watch me, some embarrassed, some just curious. And then she spoke, voice dripping honey. "Amanda? Oh, I didn't realize you were still coming without Mark." Like my absence was so logical she couldn't fathom otherwise. I could practically feel the floor tilt under me. My stomach dropped. My cheeks burned. I managed to stammer that Harold had invited us, that Mark wanted me to be there even though he was out of town. She patotted her pearls like they were a medal. "Oh, I just assumed you wouldn't come alone. I gave your seat to friends. You understand, right?" And I realized everyone was waiting to see if I'd break. That moment felt like it stretched forever. Every eye on me, judging or pitying or entertained. I could see Laura looking away, embarrassed for me. Harold cleared his throat but didn't speak up. Catherine just smiled. She had me exactly where she wanted me publicly, small. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked anyway. I said I was invited. She waved a hand like it was trivial. "Another time, dear. We're full tonight." The words weren't even cruel. That was the worst part. They were dismissive, polite enough that objecting would make me look rude. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to cry. But I felt frozen in place, pinned by the spectacle. She'd engineered it perfectly. Exclude me so thoroughly I couldn't even pretend it was an oversight. Make sure everyone saw me as the outsider I really was. I glanced around the table. No one was meeting my eyes except Colin, who was smirking like this was the best entertainment he'd had all week. Catherine gave me one last look, satisfied. "Perhaps a more casual place would suit you tonight." I felt the words slice me open, but even as the humiliation burned, something else lit up inside me. Rage, defiance, the memory of every time she'd tried to make me feel less, and I decided I wasn't going to give her the show she wanted. Not this Chimie, not ever again. As I stood there, cheeks burning, fingers digging into my clutch, the humiliation was almost enough to make me turn and flee. I could already picture myself crying in the car, cursing myself for even trying. But in that silence, as Catherine's perfect smile mocked me, something unexpected sparked in my brain. I remembered exactly where I was standing. Monarch wasn't just a restaurant to me. 6 months ago, it had been my project, my victory. I'd been hired to save this place when it was hemorrhaging money, its reputation falling apart. I'd spent weeks here, walking the dining room, watching the staff work, tasting dishes with the owner. I hadn't just consulted, I had given them the strategy that brought them back to life. I remembered the late nights sitting with Daniel, as he vented about reviews, calling his food pretentious and soulless. I'd helped him find his voice in the menu, reconnect with why he'd wanted to cook in the first place. We'd reimagined everything, from the wine list to the lighting to the service script, making it more personal, more real. When they reopened, the critics raved. Reservations shot up. The wait lists grew months long. It wasn't arrogance to say I'd been a huge part of that. It was fact. And Catherine had no idea. She'd chosen this place specifically to show me I didn't belong, to highlight the gap between her world and mine. But she didn't know this place was my resume in action, that she'd picked the exact wrong battleground for this fight. That irony hit me so hard I nearly laughed out loud. My humiliation started to turn, alchemizing into something sharper, something harder. I stood there, letting the memory settle over me like armor. I wasn't some poor girl from nowhere who'd lucked into this family. I was a professional with a proven record, Someone who had saved businesses, kept dreams alive, made real change. This wasn't her world. It was mine. She just had on tea. Realized it yet, and as the table fell back into hushed conversation, pretending not to watch me, I took a slow breath and made a decision. I wasn't leaving. Not humiliated. Not small. If Catherine wanted a show, I'd give her one, but it wouldn't be the one she planned. My first instinct was still too bold. I'm not going to lie about that. Every part of me was screaming to run, to get away from the eyes, the smirks, the suffocating sense of not belonging. I imagined pushing the heavy door open, gulping in the cold night air, sinking into the driver's seat, and sobbing until I had no tears left. It would have been so easy, so familiar. I'd done it before. I'd walked away before, telling myself it wasn't worth the fight. But I felt something shift inside me, a stubbornness I'd inherited from my dad, who'd never once backed down from a challenge he believed in. A quiet steel I'd watched in my mom when she'd worked double shifts and still made it home to help with homework. I heard my own voice in my head, though, one I used to hype myself up before big client meetings, before negotiations where everyone assumed I didn't belong. You're not leaving. Not this time. Because if I walked out, I'd be proving Catherine right. I'd be showing her I was exactly who she said I was, someone who didn't belong, someone too fragile for her world. I wasn't about to hand her that victory. Not after everything I'd built. Not after everything I'd survived. My pulse slowed. My breathing evened out. I could feel my heart pounding less with panic and more with anger. I realized then that this wasn't just about tonight. It wasn't about one dinner or one insult. It was about every time I'd been made to feel small. Every moment I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Every silence I'd maintained so Mark wouldn't feel caught in the middle. It was about the version of myself I wanted to be. The woman I'd promised I was when I took this career, when I said yes to this marriage. So I squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and decided to do something I'd never done before. I decided to make Catherine watch me take up space she thought was hers alone. I wasn't going to make a scene, wasn't going to scream, but I was going to remind her and everyone else who exactly I was. With my decision made, I turned away from the table before anyone could see the tears that still burned at the corners of my eyes. I walked carefully, heels clicking on the polished floor, back straight, even though my knees felt like they might give. I approached the host stand, where the Ma 3D was reviewing reservations.com and professional, as always. He looked up at me and recognition dawned immediately. Amanda Lewis, he said, a genuine smile replacing his neutral service face. He remembered me. Of course, he did. I'd spent weeks here, working alongside them to fix their broken system. I'd trained half the staff on guest experience and upselling without sounding fake. We'd shared late-night post-shift drinks celebrating a 5-star review that had saved their jobs. I was more than a guest. I was part of the reason they still had careers. Is Daniel in tonight? I asked, voice steady even though my hands were trembling slightly. The Mater D immediately nodded, saying he'd get the chef right away. I saw him disappear into the kitchen, and for the first time all evening, I exhaled fully. My heart slowed, the panic ebbing. I wasn't powerless here. I had allies. I had earned allies. I glanced back at the table and saw Catherine watching me, her eyes narrowing. She thought I was slinking off in defeat, arranging for a cab, maybe begging for a table at a cheaper restaurant down the street. She had no idea I wasn't running. I was about to make her biggest insult backfire so spectacularly it would leave a mark for years. Because Monarch wasn't just her playground to show off her social standing. It was my stage too, and tonight, she was going to see exactly what it meant to underestimate me. I didn't wait long before the kitchen door swung open and Daniel appeared, chef's coat crisp despite the dinner rush. He spotted me instantly and his whole face lit up. "Oh, Amanda," he boomed, loud enough for half the dining room to hear. He strode toward me, arms out, completely ignoring the hushed, curious looks from other guests. I felt something loosen in my chest at the sight of him. Here was someone who knew me, not just my name, but my work, my worth. He didn't bother with polite handshakes. He pulled me into a hug that felt genuine, warm, and for a second I thought I might actually cry. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming in tonight?" he asked, stepping back but keeping a hand on my shoulder. I would have prepared something special. The Mater D hovered nearby, ready to assist, eyes darting between us with respect. I managed a smile, steadying myself with that familiarity. Actually, Daniel, there's been a bit of a mix-up, I said carefully. I gestured toward the table where Catherine was now staring with pinch-lipped confusion, her head cocked like a bird sensing a threat. I'm here for that party, but apparently there isn't a seat for me. I kept my tone even. No self-pity. Just facts. Daniel's eyes followed my nod, and something cold and assessing slid over his face. He wasn't stupid. He understood exactly what was happening without me needing to spell it out. His voice dropped, low and firm. That's not going to work. Not here. Not for you. He turned to his staff like a general rallying troops. Prepare table 12 immediately. The chef's table, the one usually booked for celebrities or VIP critics. I saw Catherine's eyes widen as Daniel clapped me on the back and told me to follow him. The hush at their table was deafening. I wasn't being dismissed to some budget-friendly spot. I was being escorted to the best seat in the house. By the owner himself. And for the first time that night, I felt the scales tilt in my favor. As Daniel led me through the dining room, the hum of conversation seemed to drop a notch, replaced by subtle whispers and sideways glances. People recognized him. The chiffonnier himself escorting a guest was rare enough to draw attention. I didn't look back at Catherine right away. I didn't need to. I could feel her watching, her confusion hardening into fury with every step I took away from her table. I focused on Daniel's broad shoulders ahead of me, the warmth of his voice as he apologized for the inconvenience, as if this had been the restaurant's mistake. It wasn't lost on me that he was claiming my problem as his. That was the thing about real leadership, and something Catherine would never understand. He wasn't just saving me from embarrassment. He was staking his reputation on my value. We reached table 12, already being reset at record speed by the staff. A crisp white cloth, gleaming silver, fresh flowers. It overlooked the open kitchen, the city lights beyond, usually booked months in advance for food critics or via. Daniel pulled out a chair with a flourish, like I was royalty. Nothing but the best for the woman who saved my restaurant, he said, loud enough for the closest tables to hear. I heard a clatter behind me, someone dropping a fork. Conversation rippled and restarted. I finally glanced back at Catherine's table. Harold looked confused. Mark's sister Laura looked mortified, and Catherine herself sat frozen. Her hand tightened around her wine glass so hard I thought it might crack. For once, she didn't have anything to say, and I realized then that the power dynamic had completely shifted. She'd planned to humiliate me, to put me in my place. But now everyone could see the truth. I wasn't some desperate hanger-on grateful for scraps. I was a respected professional, treated like a VIP in the very space she'd chosen to exclude me from. As I settled into that chair, Daniel personally handing me the wine list, I felt a quiet, deep satisfaction I can't even fully describe. It wasn't petty revenge, it was validation. It was knowing I didn't have to raise my voice to prove my worth. The entire room could see it. Catherine could see it. And there was no way to spin or deny what was happening. That night taught me something important about standing my ground, about refusing to let someone else decide where I belonged. Maybe you felt that way before, Tulay. You had to fight for every inch of respect, for every bit of space you deserved. If you have, you know how powerful it feels to finally stop apologizing for existing. If you're into stories about not backing down, about finding your voice even when it shakes, I'd love for you to stick around. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey. It helps share these stories with people who might need them. And if you really want to support the channel, consider clicking super thanks below. It's a small way to say you appreciate these real, messy, human moments, and it helps me keep bringing them to you. You'll find it in the options right under this video. Because, trust me, the dinner wasn't over yet. Catherine had planned her big scene, but I was about to show her that you can't keep someone small when they've learned how to take up space. When I sat down at table 12, I felt the hush spread through the room like ripples on water. The staff moved like a well-oiled machine, setting down a fresh arrangement of flowers, laying out silverware so precise it looked choreographed. Daniel lingered at my side, chatting with me in a relaxed, friendly way that made it obvious this wasn't some last-minute favor. This was respect. This was familiarity earned through countless late nights fixing a broken system. He asked me if I'd like my usual cocktail, one we'd designed together for the menu. Drink literally named the Lewis. I nodded, biting back a smile. This wasn't just seating me. This was showcasing our history. The bartender, recognizing the order, raised a glass in my direction like an old friend. I could feel the energy of the room shift. Curious, interested, whispering. Across the dining room, I finally let my gaze drift to Catherine's table. She was frozen in place, her posture rigid. The entire performance she'd orchestrated was unraveling in real time. Harold was leaning in, whispering urgently. Laura wouldn't meet my eyes. Even their friends, the ones who'd taken my seat, were glancing at each other, uncomfortable in the glow of her now failing plan. The waiter arrived with my cocktail, placing it gently in front of me with a practiced flourish. "Compliments of Chef Daniel," he said with a nod. He didn't have to add anything else. The message was clear. I wasn't an afterthought. I was a guest of honor. I sipped it slowly, letting the balance of sweet and strong settle on my tongue. It tasted like vindication. It was the kind of moment that feels slow and cinematic, like I could see every expression shift, every realization land. Catherine couldn't hide it anymore. Whatever stories she'd told them about me, that I was the outsider, the interloper. The charity case was dissolving under the warm glow of the truth. Daniel didn't just seat me, he made sure everyone in earshot knew why. Between courses, he stopped by to chat, checking in about the menu changes we'd brainstormed together, asking for my thoughts on the new supplier he'd started using. It wasn't forced, it was comfortable. Two professionals talk and shop in their shared success story, and he made no effort to lower his voice. I saw heads turning as he thanked me, without irony or subtlety, for saving his restaurant. "We wouldn't be here without you," he said at one point, laying a hand on my shoulder in a gesture so casual, so genuine that it made my throat tighten. It was the kind of public gratitude people like Catherine would never think to offer. It was personal. It was authentic. My server treated me like I was royalty. Special amuse-bouche not on the menu. Wine recommendations that matched the new pairings I'd helped them design. He even told me Chef Daniel had asked the pastry team to experiment with a new dessert in my honor. Every course felt like a quiet triumph, a validation of work I'd once been so proud of. I cried in my car afterward. At one point, Daniel gestured to the room, telling another guest about the consultant who'd revolutionized his service model. He didn't say it to show off. He said it because he was proud of it, of us. I caught snippets of conversations at other tables. People wondering who I was, realizing I wasn't just somebody's wife tagging along. I was the reason Monarch had earned its new reputation. And all the while, I felt Catherine's gaze on me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just sat there, calm and polite, accepting the respect I'd earned without apology. Because for once, I wasn't the outsider she painted me to be. I was exactly where I belonged. It didn't take long for the realization to hit Catherine's table. Harold was the first to crack. He watched Daniel greet me like an old friend, heard the servers thanking me for my work, his brow furrowed. And he actually stood up at one point to come over. I braced myself, heart thumping. But when he reached me, he just bewildered. "Amanda," he said, voice low but kind. "How do you know the owner?" I set down my fork carefully, choosing my words with practiced calm. "I consulted for Monarch last year, helped them restructure the service model, menu development, sourcing. It was struggling, but we turned it around." I didn't embellish. I didn't downplay it either. I simply told the truth. Harold blinked a few times, then glanced around the shining, packed dining room. I could see the respect dawning in his eyes, replacing the vague politeness he'd always worn with me. He actually smiled. "I had no idea," he said, shaking his head. There was something almost apologetic in it. Catherine didn't mention that. I just shrugged. She didn't ask. Back at their table, the conversation had fallen awkward and hushed. Laura wouldn't look at me at all. The couple who'd taken my seat shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. Even Catherine was quiet, Her eyes locked on me with something that looked like panic fighting to stay hidden behind icy composure. Her perfect narrative was fracturing. And in that silence, for the first time since I'd joined their family, I felt like they saw me, not as the charity case, not as the mechanic's daughter, not even as Mark's wife, but as someone who mattered, someone with skill, value, power, and there was no going back from that. I should have known Catherine wouldn't let it in quietly. Even across the dining room, I felt her rage brewing like a storm she could barely contain. She'd built this dinner as a stage for my humiliation, and now the entire room was watching her plan collapse. Eventually, she snapped. I heard her chair scrape harshly against the floor, a sound that sliced through the low hum of conversation like a knife. Heads turned. She didn't care. She was already marching toward me, each step fueled by fury she was trying and failing to hide behind her carefully cultivated poise. When she reached my table, she didn't greet me, didn't even pretend to be polite. She stood there, jaw clenched so tight I thought her teeth might crack, gripping the back of the empty chair like she might fling it. Her voice, when it finally emerged, was low and shaking with rage. "What did you do, Amanda? Use Mark's name. Pull strings. This is absurd." Her words were meant to cut, to expose me as a fraud in front of everyone, but her voice trembled. She was rattled in a way I'd never seen before. I set down my glass slowly, deliberately. I could feel my heart racing, but my face stayed calm. "Good evening, Catherine. Would you like to sit?" I asked it gently, knowing it would infuriate her further. She hissed something about me arranging this spectacle just to embarrass her. I felt the entire dining room hold its breath. Servers froze. Guests pretended not to watch, but couldn't help themselves. For once, it wasn't me on trial, it was her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm here because Harold invited me, because Mark wanted me here. I didn't know you'd remove me from the reservation," I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. She sputtered, gesturing wildly at the staff, the special dishes, the owner himself. "How do you explain this?" she demanded, voice cracking on the last word. I just looked at her, steady. "Because, Catherine," I said softly, "I'm not a guest here. I'm part of why this place is what it is." It was Daniel who stepped in then, appearing at my side like he'd been waiting for his cue. He introduced himself smoothly to Catherine, voice calm but loaded with authority. "Chef Daniel Grant. You must be Amanda's mother. Thank you for being family to someone who helped save this restaurant. We owe her quite a lot here." Catherine blinked, her mouth opening and closing, no words coming out. The hush in the room turned electric. For once, there was no polite fiction to hide behind. The truth was out in the open, bright and undeniable. I felt every nerve in my body buzzing, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned back in my chair slightly, eyes locked with Catherine's. I spoke slowly, deliberately, so no one would miss a word. My background isn't in fine dining or social clubs. It's in strategy, operations, helping places like this figure out who they are and tell their story. I've worked with restaurants all over this city, all over the country, and Monarch. 6 months ago, it was failing. Daniel called me. I didn't just consult, I helped save it. The silence around us felt absolute. Catherine looked like she'd been slapped. Her eyes darted to Harold, to Laura, to the friends who'd taken my seat. No one rushed to defend her. No one tried to defuse the moment with a joke. I felt the heat rising in my chest, the anger I'd been swallowing for years finally finding its voice. But it wasn't rage anymore. It was clarity. It was truth. "I didn't tell you about it because I wasn't trying to impress you," I continued, softer but no less firm. "I don't need your approval to know my worth. I'm proud of where I come from, proud of my parents who worked for everything they have. I didn't marry Mark to climb some social ladder. I married him because he's kind, because he sees people, really sees them. I just wish you'd try to see me." Catherine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her perfect socialite armor cracked just a bit. I saw her fingers tremble on the back of the chair. Harold reached out as if to steady her, but she pulled away. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely lost, like she couldn't figure out the rules of this new game where I wasn't playing by her script. Daniel broke the tension with a polite cough. Shall the first bring dessert, Miss Lewis? Or would you like to continue speaking with your family? The question was gentle, but it landed like a gavel. This was my table now. My choice. Catherine blinked, realizing she was the interloper here. And for once, she had nothing left to say. Harold finally stepped forward, clearing his throat in the heavy silence. He didn't look angry, just tired. Catherine, he said, voice low but firm. This isn't who we are. This display, it's not acceptable. He didn't yell, he didn't shame her, but the disappointment in his voice was cutting. Catherine flinched like he'd struck her. For all her power games, she'd never planned for him to turn on her in public. Laura spoke up next, voice trembling. Mom, you can't keep doing this. It's humiliating for you, for us, for Amanda. Her husband put a hand on her back, nodding along. Even the friends who'd taken my seat looked down at their plates, uncomfortable with the truth laid so bare. Catherine's eyes darted from face to face, realizing she was alone in this fight she'd picked. I watched it all without gloating. There was no satisfaction in seeing her squirm, just a kind of weary relief that it was finally out in the open. No more pretending. No more polite little lies that made me the oversensitive one. No more plain dumb about the way she chipped at me for years. This was the reckoning she'd been trying to avoid. She tried once more to regain her footing. I never meant to exclude her. I just thought, but her voice faltered when she looked at me. I met her gaze steadily. You thought I wouldn't belong. I finished for her. She closed her eyes briefly, swallowing hard, and didn't deny it. That was the closest thing to honesty we'd had in 6 years. Harriet sighed, finally placing a hand on her shoulder. Apologize. It wasn't a suggestion. Catherine's lips parted, trembling. I'm sorry, Amanda, she managed. The words were stiff, but they were there, and the entire room felt like it exhaled at once. For the first time, she had to admit event, if only in that moment, that she'd been wrong. After Catherine's apology, the energy in the restaurant shifted. It was like the whole room exhaled, the tension finally bleeding out. The clink of cutlery resumed. Conversations picked up again in cautious murmurs, but our corner of the dining room felt suspended in that fragile silence. Catherine sat back down at her table without another word, eyes lowered. Her perfect social mask cracked in ways she probably didn't even realize. For the first time, she wasn't orchestrating the narrative, she was just another guest trying to figure out what came next. Harold lingered by my table, his eyes soft but heavy with regret. I should have said something sooner, he admitted quietly. I knew she was difficult, but I thought it was harmless. I just shook my head gently. It's not your fault, I said, and I meant it. He didn't create her cruelty, but his silence had given it room to grow. The acknowledgement between us felt honest in a way that made my chest ache. Laura walked over to her, looking pale and shaken. She swallowed hard before speaking. I'm sorry, Amanda. I knew she could be sharp, but I didn't realize how bad it was. I should have stood up for you. I could see how much it cost her to say it in front of everyone. I didn't want to punish her for past cowardice. Thank you, I said simply. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Even the friends who'd been given my stolen seat eventually approached, awkward and embarrassed. They stammered apologies, insisting they hadn't known what was going on. I didn't absolve them completely. They'd seen the extra chair vanish and never asked why. But I nodded anyway, too tired to hold on to anger. Actually, at that point, I just wanted to eat my damn dessert in peace. Daniel returned with a quiet grace, offering me coffee and a decadent chocolate creation he'd designed especially for me. For the woman who taught me to tell my story through food, he said with a wink. I smiled at him, genuinely, feeling warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with relief. Because despite everything, I hadn't let her break me. Once dessert was cleared, Harold asked if he could sit with me for a minute. I gestured to the chair across from me, and he lowered himself slowly, the lines on his face deep with thought. I'm sorry for tonight, he began, voice low and rough. Not just for what happened here, but for all of it. 4 years of it. I felt something loosen in my chest at hearing those words out loud. Finally, he looked at me hard. Eyes searching. You're good for Mark. You make him better. You make all of us think a little harder. I see that now. I should have seen it sooner. It was more than I'd expected. I didn't know what to say for a second, the knot in my throat making words impossible. Finally, I managed a quiet, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a start. Laura hovered nearby, biting her lip, then finally sat next to Harold. She didn't look at me at first, eyes focused on her clasped hands. "I always just let her do it," she whispered. It was easier to stay quiet, but it wasn't right. "I'm sorry, Amanda." I studied her for a moment, seeing not my rival, but another woman who'd been shaped by their mother's relentless standards. "It's not easy standing up to her," I admitted, "but it has to start somewhere." She nodded quickly, eyes shiny. "I want it too. I don't want this for my kids. I don't want them learning this is normal." That hit me like a punch to the gut, because I understood exactly what she meant. The cycle had to break somewhere. I realized then that Catherine hadn't to just hurt me. She'd hurt all of them in smaller, quieter ways. Harold reached out and squeezed Laura's shoulder before glancing at me again. "We'd like you to come over next week. Just you and Mark. Maybe we can talk, try to fix this." I considered it, really considered it. Part of me wanted to say no, but I also remembered the feeling of Daniel's hand on my shoulder, of finally being seen. "Okay," I said. "We'll come." By the time I finally stood to leave, the dining room had returned to its comfortable murmur of laughter and clinking glassware. But it felt different to me now, lighter, like I could actually breathe in it without my chest tightening. I walked out slowly, letting myself savor the weight of my heels clicking on the marble, not caring that every eye seemed to follow me, not as the outsider, but as the woman who hadn't back to do. Outside, the night air was cool against my overheated skin. I paused at the edge of the sidewalk, finally letting out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for hours. My fingers trembled as I pulled my coat tighter around me. For a second, I thought I might break down entirely, but instead of tears, a small, surprised laugh bubbled up from my chest. I'd done it. I hadn't let her win. I thought about calling Mark then and there, telling him everything in breathless detail, but I didn't want to reduce it to a hurried phone call while he sat in some hotel room miles away. No, this was something I wanted to say to his face. To tell him the whole messy truth about what Catherine did, about what I said, about what finally broke open between us all. Because it wasn't just my victory tonight, it was the first real crack in the wall that had stood between me and the Prestons for so long. Maybe it wouldn't lead to best friend shopping trips with Catherine or family vacations where we laughed over wine. I wasn't naive, but it could lead to something honest, something real, and that was more valuable than any apology. As I waited for my car, I looked back at Monarch's glowing entrance one last time. I remembered the fear I'd felt walking in. The fury of being told there was no seat for me, and I smiled. Because tonight, I hadn't just found a seat, I'd claimed it, and no one, least of all Catherine, would ever be able to take that from me again. When Mark got home from his trip, I was sitting on the couch in my robe, hair pulled up in a messy bun, staring at nothing in particular. He dropped his suitcase immediately, eyes scanning me like he was trying to read the damage before I even opened my mouth. "Amanda," he said, voice gentle but already wary. I could see the apology in his eyes before I even began. And suddenly, it all hit me again, the restaurant. Catherine smirked. The hush when she realized I wasn't leaving quietly. I took a long breath and patted the cushion next to me. He sat without hesitating, hand on my knee, thumb brushing back and forth like he needed to ground himself. I told him everything. No dramatic edits or polite omissions. His face shifted with every word, horror at what his mother had done, awe at how Daniel had backed me up, fury at himself for not being there. By the time I finished, there was a silence so thick it felt like we were wading through it. He didn't rush to fill it. He didn't defend her. He just pulled me against his chest and held me so tightly I could feel his heart pounding against my ear. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my hair. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you from this." I swallowed hard, eyes burning. "You didn't know," I said. "She's good at hiding it, at making me look like the crazy one if I brought it up." His arms tightened. Never again. We sat like that for a long time. No TV, no music, Just the quiet honesty of two people realizing something in their marriage had to change. He promised he'd talk to her, that he wouldn't let her pretend it hadn't happened. I promised I wouldn't pretend it didn't hurt, that I wouldn't keep swallowing it down to keep the peace. It wasn't an argument, it was an agreement. And when he finally pulled back and kissed my forehead, there was something raw in his eyes I'd never seen before. "I'm proud of you," he said hoarsely, "for standing up for yourself, for us." I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the ache of all the years I'd kept quiet. It wasn't healed yet, but for the first time, it felt like it could be. A week later, Mark and I drove to his parents' house in near silence. It wasn't the comfortable quiet we sometimes shared on long trips, but something thick with anticipation. We'd been in Vidno, summoned for a conversation. Not a dinner, not a celebration. Just an overdue reckoning that had taken years too long to arrive. I watched the neighborhood roll past the window. All those perfect lawns and neat driveways, and felt my stomach twist in knots. Catherine answered the door herself, which was new. Usually she'd have one of the staff do it, maintaining that thin layer of distance she loved so much. She looked smaller, somehow, still perfectly dressed, hair smooth and controlled, but her eyes flickered with something unsteady. She didn't hug us, didn't even smile. She just stepped aside to let us in, clearing her throat like she was swallowing words she didn't know how to form. We sat in the formal living room, the three of us on separate islands of expensive upholstery. Harold sat beside Catherine but angled toward me and Mark, hands folded, gaze steady. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice grave but kind. Catherine said nothing at first, her fingers twisting the delicate chain around her neck. Finally she spoke, voiced flat. "I wanted to apologize. It was the most uncomfortable sentence I'd ever heard." She tried. "I'll give her that." She said she hadn't realized how her behavior came across, that she never meant to make me feel unwelcome. I didn't interrupt. I didn't soften it for her. I just let her squirm in the silence her words created. When she finally looked at me, really looked at me, her eyes shone with a fragile, watery sheen. "I'm sorry," she said again, and this time it sounded real. I nodded once. I didn't leap up to hug her, didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I did say thank you, because it was a start. It was the crack in the foundation that let the first bit of light in. And I realized then that forgiveness wasn't something I was giving her. It was something I was offering myself, a way to stop carrying her judgment like a weight strapped to my chest. Over the next few months, things didn't magically transform into some sitcom perfect family dynamic. Catherine didn't suddenly become my best friend or start texting me heart emojis. But something shifted. She stopped the subtle digs. She asked questions without the razor blade edge. She even complimented me once, awkward and stumbling, but sincere enough to make me blink in surprise. It wasn't effortless. It was work, but it was real. Harold began reaching out more, inviting us for lunch, just the four of us. He liked to talk business strategy, actually listened when I explained the nuances of consulting. Laura sent me texts about her kids' milestones, asked if I could recommend places to eat for date night with her husband. It felt tentative, like everyone was testing the ice before stepping forward. But for the first time, no one was pretending there hadn't been damage to repair. And Catherine? She asked me for a recipe once. Said she'd heard I was good at teaching people to make intimidating meals feel simple. Her voice cracked halfway through asking. I said yes without making her beg. We cooked together in that pristine kitchen she'd once used to intimidate me, side by side like two women trying to figure out what family meant. It wasn't cozy, but it was honest. Sometimes Mark would catch me watching his family at dinner, my expression soft, my eyes a little wet. He'd squeeze my hand under the table, smiling with that boyish gratitude that always undid me. Because, even though it wasn't perfect, it was better, it was real. And that felt like the biggest win of all. I think about that night at Monarch often, about standing there, humiliated, told there wasn't room for me. And I smile, because I know now I'll never ask for permission to belong anywhere again. I know what I bring to the table, and I'll never let anyone know, matter how polished or powerful, me forget that again. It wasn't like flipping a switch. There wasn't one big family hug where all the years of tension vanished in a puff of movie magic. Instead, it was small, hesitant steps. Harold would call Mark with business questions and make sure to say hello to me on speaker. Laura would send a meme that made her think of one of our old awkward dinners, adding glad we can laugh about it now. And Catherine, always the hardest to read, started pausing before she spoke. We all noticed it. The restraint, the effort. It mattered. There were still moments that made my teeth clench. Catherine sometimes slipped back into old habits, her voice going crisp and tight when I suggested something she hadn't considered. But instead of swallowing it, I'd just raise an eyebrow, and she'd sigh, mutter "you're right," and let it go. It wasn't graceful, but it was honest. And that was new for us. Honest was better than polite. Honest meant we were actually trying. Mark and I talked about it a lot. Lachiachi and I curled up under the same worn blanket on our couch. We'd dissect every family gathering. "Do you think she actually likes me?" I'd ask. He'd shrugged. "She's trying. That's enough for me." And it turned out it was enough for me too, because for so long she hadn't tried at all. The effort itself was a form of apology neither of us had ever expected to get. Sometimes Harold would catch my eye over dinner and give me this small nod. It wasn't an apology anymore. It was approval, acceptance, and I'd nod back. Not like some grateful supplicant finally allowed at the table, but as an equal. As family, even Laura noticed. She started pulling me aside to vent about their mother, rolling her eyes with exasperated affection. The same affection I was slowly, cautiously allowing myself to feel, too. It was slow work. But work that mattered, because after years of silence and polite fiction, we were finally building something real. Something messy and flawed and human. And I'd take that over the perfect facade any day. One night, long after the Monarch dinner had become a family legend no one dared joke about too loudly, Mark and I sat in our small, imperfect kitchen. I was making dinner, my hair in a messy bun, sauce splattered on my favorite old tea. He was leaning against the counter, watching me like he always did when he had something on his mind. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Do you ever think about kids?" I froze for a second, spatula halfway to the pan. "We've talked about it before in abstract, safe ways. Someday, when we're ready." But this was different. His voice was gentle but firm, like he was testing the shape of the idea out loud for the first time. I set the spatula down carefully, wiped my hands on a dish towel that had seen better days, and turned to face him. "Yeah," I admitted. "I do." He smiled then, soft and tired and so full of love it made my chest ache. "I think we'd be good at it," he said. "You especially. You don't let people get away with things, but you never make them feel small. I want our kids to have that." It was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to me, and I felt tears stain my eyes before I could stop them. He didn't look away. He just let me feel it. We talked for hours that night about what we'd want to teach them, about how we'd break the cycles we'd both grown up with, how we'd make sure they knew they were enough, no matter what table they sat at, no matter who tried to tell them otherwise. We laughed about names we liked, about the possibility of them inheriting my stubborn streak or his relentless optimism. It was the kind of talk that felt like building something brick by emotional brick. When we finally went to bed, tangled together in that old creaky frame, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope, not for perfect dinners or flawless families, but for honest, loving ones. The kind who messed up, fought, apologized, and tried again. The kind who always made room for each other at the table, no matter what. Months after the dinner, Catherine invited us over for what she awkwardly called a casual family lunch. I'd braced myself for it the entire drive over, fingers drumming nervously on the door handle. But when we walked in, she met us at the door with an unsteady smile and unbelievably offered to take my coat. It was such a normal gesture, it nearly undid me on the spot. I handed it over, swallowing the lump in my throat. The house was the same pristine, filled with expensive quiet, but the air felt different. Laura greeted me with an actual hug, muttering, "Thank God you're here," in my ear before pulling back and rolling her eyes at her mom. Harold handed me a glass of wine like it was a peace treaty. Even Catherine made small talk about my latest project, her voice only wobbling once when she called it impressive. I didn't call her on it. I just smiled and said thank you. We sat down to eat at that long, polished dining table that had once felt like an enemy combatant. This time, there was no battle. No snide comments, no extra chair conspicuously missing. Catherine even asked me to pass the salad. When I did, she thanked me quietly, eyes darting away like she was afraid of my reaction. But I just nodded, giving her that small mercy. We both knew how much it cost her. At one point, Harold lifted his glass for an impromptu toast. To family, he said simply, voice cracking. The one you're born with, and the one you build. I looked around the table and felt the sting of tears. Mark's hand found mine under the table, squeezing once, solid and sure. And I realized this wasn't just their table anymore. It was mine, too. Ours. I left that day feeling like we'd done something hard and necessary, that we'd chosen not to stay stuck in old hurts and roles that didn't fit anymore. We'd built something new, messy, fragile, but real. And as Mark drove us home, I leaned my head on the window, smiling for the first time in years. I wasn't rehearsing what I'd say next time. I was already planning what dish I'd bring. Later that night, after the family lunch, I stood alone in our kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug of tea going cold in my hands. The quiet felt heavier than usual. The silence filled with the echoes of laughter and small talk I hadn't believed would ever include me. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it wash over me the way. Catherine had looked away after thanking me. The sound of Harold's voice cracking during his toast, the press of Mark as he handed me. It felt like a movie I wasn't sure I was really in. I thought about that night at Monarch, about standing there, humiliated, told there wasn't a seat for me. I remembered how small I'd felt, how badly I'd wanted to disappear. And then I remembered the slow smile that had spread across my face when I remembered exactly who I was, exactly what I'd done to help build that place. That moment of choosing not to shrink, not to run. I wrapped my hands tighter around my mug, grounding myself in that memory. It wasn't just about Catherine. It was about every time someone had tried to tell me where I did or didn't belong. Every subtle dismissal I'd swallowed. Every time I'd let myself believe I was lucky to be allowed in the room. That dinner wasn't just a confrontation with her. It was a confrontation with every part of me that thought staying quiet was safer than standing up. And I felt proud. Bone-deep proud. But there was sadness too. Mourning the years I'd spent trying so hard to make myself acceptable, the times I'd bit my tongue until it bled, the friendship with Laura that might have been easier if I'd pushed back sooner, even the lost time with Catherine where things could have been different if we'd both just been honest. I didn't pretend those regrets weren't there, but I wasn't going to live in them anymore. As I rinsed my mug and turned off the kitchen light, I told myself I deserved to let that chapter close. Not erase it, just let it be what it was. A lesson, a turning point. Because that's the thing about being pushed out of someone else's table. Eventually you realize you can build your own. And if you're brave enough, you can even make space for them there too. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easy to me. I'd always thought it meant letting someone off the hook, pretending it hadn't happened, smoothing it over for everyone's comfort but my own. For so long, I held on to the slights Catherine had thrown at me like proof that I wasn't crazy, that it had really happened. I was so scared that if I let them go, I'd be letting her win, that she'd never know how much she hurt me. But that day, watching her stumble over her apology, seeing the way she avoided my eyes even as she tried, I realized forgiveness wasn't about her at all. It was about me, about whether I wanted to keep carrying that resentment like a badge of honor that weighed 100 pounds. Whether I wanted to let those old insults keep echoing in my head long after she'd stopped saying them out loud. I didn't forgive her because she deserved it. I forgave her because I was tired of letting her define my place in that family, tired of strategizing every word, every facial expression, tired of shrinking. It didn't mean I'd forget. It didn't mean I'd pretend it was okay. It just meant I was done letting it poison me. I could remember it without letting it control me. Mark asked me once if I thought things would ever be normal with her. I'd laughed a little, shaking my head. Probably not, I said, but maybe they'll be real. That was enough. Because real was messy, real was complicated, but Rhea meant she'd see me. And if she saw me, even a little, it meant there was room to try. So I chose forgiveness. For her, yes. But mostly for me. For the woman who'd walked into Monarch thinking she was lucky to be there. And the woman who'd walked out knowing damn well she belonged. For the girl who'd sat quiet at so many dinners. And the woman who would never do it again. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. In the months that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Catherine and I weren't best friends, but we weren't adversaries either. She'd invite us to dinner and actually wait for me to answer before setting the table. She'd ask about my projects, even if she didn't understand them fully, and sometimes she'd listen without interrupting. And I'd answer her without my guard up, without that reflexive sting in my voice. It was clumsy, but it was progress. There were setbacks too, awkward silences that stretched too long, moments where she'd say something tone-deaf and I'd feel my blood rise. But instead of letting it simmer, I'd just look at her until she realized it. And more often than not, she'd clear her throat and mumble, sorry. It wasn't graceful, but it was real. And I'd take that over polite cruelty any day. Mark noticed the difference too. He'd watch us from across the room, eyes flicking between us like he was waiting for sparks to fly, only to relax when they didn't. He told me once, voice thick, I'm so proud of you. I kissed him for that. For seeing me, for believing me, for making it clear I'd never have to fight this fight alone again. We hosted Thanksgiving that year, my parents, Mark's parents, Laura and her husband, their kids. It was chaos. It was loud and messy, and someone spilled cranberry sauce on the carpet. But when Catherine complimented my stuffing recipe like it, physically, her Taya actually laughed and thanked her. She blushed and didn't take it back. And for the first time, I felt like we were both just people trying. I looked around that table that night, at all of them talking over each other, glasses clinking, kids shrieking with laughter, and thought, this is what family's supposed to be. Not perfect, not easy, but chosen, built, fought for. And I promised myself, right then and there, that I'd keep making space at my table for anyone willing to try. If you stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. Really, it means a lot to share something this personal. Even if it's from the perspective of someone who once stood frozen at a dinner table while the world seemed to shrink around her. Maybe you've been there, too maybe, not at Monarch, but somewhere else where someone made you feel small. Where you wondered if you even had the right to take up space. If you have, I hope you know you're not alone. I wanted to tell this story, not because it's comfortable, but because it's true. Because family, ISN, to always easy. Because love doesn't always mean acceptance right away. And because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop apologizing for being exactly who you are. If hearing this made you think about your own story about the tables you've been excluded from, or the ones you fought to belong at, I hope you'll share it. Drop a comment below. I read them all, and there's something powerful about knowing we're not the only ones who vibe on there. If you felt connected to this, I'd really love it if you'd hit that like button. It's such a small thing, but it tells me these stories matter. And if you want more of them, more honest, messy, real conversations about family, love, standing your ground, I hope you'll subscribe. That way you won't miss any new videos where we dive into these moments that shape who we are. And if you really want to go one step further to support this channel, consider clicking on Super Thanks below. It's that little heart icon with a $sign under the video. It's an easy way to say this meant something to me, and it truly helps me keep making more of these stories. Even a couple bucks goes a long way toward keeping the lights on here and making sure these voices keep being heard. Because in the end, that's what this channel is for. For people who don't want to play small, who want to tell the truth even when it's messy, who want to find their voice, their seat at the table, and maybe even build a new table for someone else who needs it. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And don't forget your story matters to always